On Thursday, August 1st, at 7 p.m., a performance will be staged at the Performance Hall at Arlington Common. Texting through grief is about losing a loved one, a life partner, which of course is a game-changing cataclysmic event after which life is never the same again. There is no going back to what used to be. Mary Bacon and James Still lost husbands within months of each other. To cope with their grief, they began texting each other. They have turned this correspondence into a dramatic presentation, and we had a chance to talk with both of them about their experience and the dramatic production that came out of that.
The story is really simple. There's two people, we each lost our husbands. Mine was very sudden, and James lost his over 9 years cancer. And but we had, because we'd worked together several times, and I think you texted me the first time in March, and my husband died on January 20th, 2023. So 23. And I just wrote, I wrote back about hearing about Lenny, but I hadn't. We just started texting back and forth. And then we had a fellow theater art, I think it was Lisa, or maybe, Lisa Rothy, who's a director. She's directed me in James's plays, and a very dear friend, and she's like, you guys should save these texts. And we did, that's not hard to do. And then we were like, should we make something out of this? We're hesitant to call it a play. It's not like, this is the story, and this is the beginning, the middle, and this is a project or an experience of grief, of the walk through grief, intense grief, where your self is divided in half and tossed out the window, and it's like over a period of time. And so that's what we're working on.
I would just add to that in addition to being a project, it's an offering. It's something we hope by stepping forward and sharing our experiences that we can open a door for other people to maybe not feel so isolated in their own grief. I know for me, it's been enormously helpful to have Mary to text with, to have somebody to talk with. And yes, I went to grief groups, and I did all of that. I'm therapy, all those things. But there was something very unique about connecting with someone that I knew who was going through her own version, because I think, any kind of loss like this, you can't compare it. Everyone experiences it in a different way. But there was, I don't know if comfort is the right word, but company. I felt in company. And so in that way, less alone. And I think that, I also just say, in the spirit of it being a project, it's an experiment.
Yeah.
We're experimenting. I think all great art starts out as an experiment. And some experiments don't work. We don't know. We're going to find out.
So what made texting kind of the preferred way of communicating as opposed to like a phone call or hearing someone's voice or even email or something like that?
Well,
was there an immediacy to it?
There's the immediacy, although often James would send me a text and I would not respond for a week or two. It had a less of that urgency where you have to text right back with somebody, I'm fine, and a lot of texts are very rudimentary, like, did you get milk, get some groceries, I'm here, I looked back at my husband and I's texts, as you would, and they were all like that. There was nothing like, sometimes it was like, love you, but for the most part, it was like, where's our son, did you get dinner, and that's usually what they are. But this was something you can do anywhere. It had a little structure to it that felt kind of safe and poetry-like. But it was usually, I would say mostly I would text feelings, which is also why I think of this as something that's, we're not telling the story and showing you what happened. It's just the feelings of grief are so crazy. I felt like they are not all one thing. There are many, many different things. The misunderstandings about, are trying to understand yourself, trying to understand who you are. And we could just exchange that and there was an immediacy. Like, I have tons of friends. I have, like, a therapist. I have two grief groups, and I really believe in the community that people can choose to do whatever they want with their loss. Absolutely. And some people I've met don't talk to anyone for a year. But I have found that connecting with people is where I've learned, first of all, I'm not the only one, that was a big part of texting to James. And sometimes he would be in a completely different place. He's a few months ahead of me. And
I think also with a phone call, I do think phone calls, you have to have permission now to make a phone call. You can't expect someone to answer the phone. Mm-hmm. But a text, I knew Mary would read it eventually on her own terms. And we never left voicemail. It was almost always text. Sometimes Mary was driving and she would do a voice text, which is always kind of like confusing to me. I'm like, what do you mean you're talking to me? But no, there was something about the text that was pure and direct. And also, it wasn't like I was asking to be in a conversation in that moment of texting. The conversation was text to text, not inside the text. And that was very useful to me in ways, again, that I hadn't anticipated.
So is the play primarily, you're reciting each other's text back to each other? And is there any kind of interaction with the audience about what they're feeling about what they're hearing?
We're just thinking about it now, but we're definitely want to have community interaction as part of it, because this is going to be so personal, and this will bring up a lot for people. I would say not reciting, because like reciting poetry or something. There will be an element of that for sure, but there's also like, I don't know how to, but yes, I think of it more as like, if you've ever seen Spalding Gray or anyone just do these, that's what I think of. But those are, people who do monologues, and they're written, and then they perform them at, at one-person shows. You've done that, we both have done that. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, reciting doesn't quite capture it.
Again, I guess for me, it's sharing.
Sharing, that's good.
We're not, because it's not performing. We're not going to perform grief. We're not going to pretend we have answers. We're just going to share experiences and trusting that I think one of the many things I've learned in my own grief is everyone's grieving about something. You don't have to have lost your significant other to experience grief. And I think rather than creating a hierarchy about whose grief is more important, or it's just grief. We're a portal and an offering.
So, would the eventual outcome of this be you'd like the audience to kind of gain a better understanding or an acceptance perhaps of their own grief or own struggles through some situation, whether or not it's the death of a loved one or some kind of a loss that they are processing and struggling with? That basically the idea, hopefully, would be that.
I think processing is a great word, because I think that, and I've done a lot of shows, we both have, I've done shows about grief, or it was about a lot of loss, and people off the street come in and they touch something that they don't have permission to, or don't know how to give themselves permission to, out in the world. And then they come in and the lights go down. That's what theater is, and they're in the dark, and they have all of their minds are focused on the same thing at the same time, and something spiritual happens. And that's what this, I would hope that people would experience that. And I actually know they will, because a lot of the feelings we've expressed, I'm like, a lot of people feel this way. I mean, I know that, and then as we edit it, we're not just gonna get up and have it, we just read it. We're gonna edit it and shape it, and there'll be certain things that we want to bring out or highlight that I think are important. And the processing, our culture doesn't. Everyone says that too. It's like the culture doesn't do death well, and no one ever knows what to say. And if someone walks out of here and says, "I know what to say," I know I shouldn't say anything. I should just listen, or I don't have to. I just have to be open and allow and accept and not be afraid of doing that, because it really is. There is no other way but through. To get back to what I don't know, but. Grief, intense loss breaks you open like nothing I've ever experienced. I've never, and I think that's why it's so bewildering. It's like, how can a person be in this much pain and get up and go through a day? I've been astounded by that continually, and yet it happens. I think the human spirit is very resilient, and I think that the more that people talk about this, the more it's less awkward when someone dies. It's less awkward about to know what to do. Some people do know, and some people don't. And there's that. There's a teaching element to it. There's a sharing element to it. There's a communion element to it. And I hope that this community, for me, I hope that they walk away feeling like that they connect with each other. I hope that people, instead of not just go home, but they will have conversations after this and start talking to each other. Did you feel that way? Or I'm so sorry I never reached out, or whatever it might be. Or
I always feel like, and with almost everything I've been involved with as an artist, but I'll say for this piece especially, it's almost like Act 2 is what happens to folks when they leave. Mm-hmm. That's really Act 2 of this, because we're starting, the conversation. But another thing that struck me about our texts is how we have reached for metaphor so often in trying to describe our experience. And I think offering metaphor as something that's available to people is also a way to understand grief in a very powerful, human way. And so that's another thing I think that is unique, and it's different than reading a book. Let me say that also, having read a few books about grief. I think this is a different experience than that.
But was there some kind of a moment or a point when you were able to say, okay, this happened, I can't do anything about it, I need to move forward? Or didn't it work that way?
We're what you would call recently widowed. I'm a year and a half this month.
Oh, okay.
So James is 2 years, and we are in slightly different places. I expect that will happen in some ways just because of life, but I don't really know. It's so unfensible, grief. Now, grief, and saying grief a lot, I always got to go, what do I mean by grief? What do we mean? What is grief? It's the response, reactions, and feelings to a loss. That's like the dictionary definition. So we're talking about our response to the loss of, my husband's name was Andrew. And already I am not in agony the way I was. So things change. But I don't think there is okay, carry on. I don't look at what we've been doing as I've not carried on. I think I've been moving through. It's not like, oh, I went and did this for a while and now I'm just going to carry on with what? With my life. There's so much to accept at one time. It's too much at one time. It's almost too drastic. So, the main thing, there's a lot of gifts that grief give you, which is a huge amount of perspective, patience, appreciation. For me, a lot of it is learning to live in the present moment and to really admit I do not know what's going to happen, and accept that and be okay with that. I've changed. I was telling James earlier, I felt kind of immature the way I was with Andrew. I would not want to be the same person I was with him if he walked in the door. I would want to be this person because I know the value of things that I didn't know, and I know a lot more about myself. And we're theater artists, so I feel like we're the kind of artists we are. It's all about like how to make things better for other people, where it'll be of service, how to make meaning. How to make meaning.
Life.
That's right.
I think also, related to that question about change, that's one of the surprising things for me when Mary and I we were on Zoom for the first time. We took a few days to read through all of our texts to each other. It's about 10 hours. It's a lot of texts. This project will not be 10 hours, do not worry. However, what I want to say is, what I was struck by is, I didn't remember writing much of that. So I'm so glad that I texted Mary. And what I'm saying is, I'm not the same. I'm not in the same place that I was. It doesn't mean that I don't go backwards some days, that I don't have very hard days, but it is a continually moving forward experience. Even when I'm moving backwards, I'm aware that I am not the same. And I think this has been a good way for me to gauge that and go, I'm not the same as I was 3 months ago, 6 months ago, a year and a half ago. And the texts are kind of proof of that for me. So selfishly, it's a beautiful record of walking through this experience, with someone that I love. Very lucky to have had that.
And is this the first time either of you have sort of done a production like this, like writing something, or has your previous experience in theater just been like acting, or is this?
Well, yes, I've been an actor for a long time, but I did. I've written a few things that I've performed, but nothing so personal. Although, actually, that's not true. I was thinking, Dina, when I was up here for I have a home in New York City, and then my husband I have a house in Arlington. I worked at the theater festival one summer, and it reminded me of Colorado, where I grew up. So we've had a house in right off Sandgate for 15 years, and we came up here for COVID because I'm type 1 diabetic, and my cousin was like, "You got to get up there. We don't know how it's going to affect you." He was really scared. He's has inside intel, the COVID front for New York City. So I came up here, and there was another artist who's a really good friend of mine who also came up, and we did this piece. Her mother died at the beginning of COVID, and she was a very famous Hindi poet. And we did this piece about where we would write what was going on with us, because it was at that time where theater was like, you could not do it. The worst place to be is in a room enclosed, breathing with other people. It was like impossible. And all of us were just like, we started doing things on Zoom, not in person, but that's why theater is different from film or TV. It's live and it's in person, and the person's right there. We had written this piece, and we performed it at when Dina was at Dorset Theater Festival, and then we did a podcast of it. We re-recorded it. So that I was like, oh, that's a little similar in terms of, of course, but this is much deeper. But yeah. I've written things I've performed. I come as an actor. I'm also a director. But again, I'm not treating this like anything I've ever done before. I really am trying to be completely open to discovering what this might be. As I said, it's an experiment, and I want to stay open to what that might mean. And I should also say, Mary and I are still texting. It's not like the story's over and now we're going to figure it all out. It's really a to be continued, and that's why, when you asked us earlier about the story. Right now, the story does not have an ending. The ending will be on Thursday night, August 1st. We are in this space with people who've come to spend some time with us. And that's the ending right then. But the next morning, I'll probably text her, even though I'll be staying at her house. Text her from the other room and say, here's what I was thinking. I had a dream last night. I've sent her those texts, So it's an ongoing
ongoing experience. Well, I mean, I would like to say, because we know grief comes loaded, and there's a lot of fear around grief. I think a couple things I want to say is that people are always surprised that I'm actually funny in life, that Mary is funny, and not to say that this piece is funny, but that it's human, and that we also texted about joy and surprise and renewal and faith and so many things. Mary was referring to the gifts of grief, and I just, it's a big subject, and we're not looking at it in a very narrow way. We're looking at it in a very deep way. So I would say it's, you know, it's deep and wide, and that I'm hoping people are not afraid to come and spend time with us, because I think we'd be fun to spend some time with.
Yeah, me too. I'm like, I hope, I was even like, oh, that title, Grief. I mean, would you go in, I'm going to go see a thing on grief, it's in the title. Would I go? I don't know.
On the other hand, it's really honest, you know?
It's very honest.
We really want to be direct and honest, you know, in the way we're presenting it and what we call it and how we talk about it. You know, we're not tricking anybody.
Yeah. And that's the whole thing, like the social, of like, how are you? And people in grief will be like, I feel so compelled to answer in this way that will take care of the other person who's worried about me. But if I really tell them, how do you really want to know? And then if I tell them and they really didn't want to know, you know, it's just, that's that constant dance. And so, yeah, it's just very honest. Like someone had a podcast, it was like, terrible, thanks for asking, you know, because you are pretty terrible for a long time, for quite some time. Everything hurts, like everything hurts. And yeah. I mean, it's interesting to discover that all these cliches are true. It takes time. There's nothing you can do about it.
So there really are 5 stages? Was that the idea?
I think that was, you know, that's been debunked a little bit, but that was for people who were dying. There are 5 stages, right? You know, but there are.
And then they added a 6th stage at a certain point.
Yeah.
One of Kubler-Ross's proteges discovered a 6th stage. I think for us, again, it's not a linear experience. So we, you know, it would be very handy if we could divide our texts up into stages. That would be just so great. But it's just not that neat, you know, because you're in stage 1 and then you're in stage 5 and then, I'm back in stage 3.
Yeah.
And, you know, but again, that's what makes it a human experience. It's not so tight.
And that would be great to communicate that. So people who are like, I don't feel so confused. It's really confusing. It's a really confusing place to be in. I've never felt like anything like that before. And I think that would be great to let, you know, it's like every time someone like says something, I'm like, and I can't give myself permission to do it, it's such a gift. I'm like, oh, I can look at it that way? Oh, thanks. You know, I'm really appreciative of that. And I hope that's what this also helps people do, or just be curious. I found it very interesting. Above all. I know that's, my therapist is like, that's such a loaded word. And I'm like, isn't it great? It covers everything. It can be interestingly awful how awful it is, interesting how surprising, or, you know, how much I don't know about anything anymore, you know. But that is interesting. And keep, you know.
My mother, when I used to, when I was younger as an artist, my mother was alive, and I would do some of these crazy, more experimental theater things. My mom would come to everything I did, and she would never say she didn't like something. She would say, that was interesting. And I was like, thank you, Mom. But she was there is the point. She came to see it and took something away from it. So.
Yeah.
Texting Through Grief is a presentation by the Vermont Public Theater, and Dina Janis, formerly with the Dorset Theater Festival, is its artistic director. Again, there will be one show only on Thursday, August 1st, at the Arlington Common. For ticket information, contact Vermont Public Theater or the Arlington Common. For the GNAT-TV News Project, I'm Andrew McKeever.